My term, instead of masking, is mimicry. You have mimicked what you felt like was typical, appropriate behavior. It's like, I'm not sure exactly what to say or do in this particular situation, but I'm witnessing them say and do things in the same situation, and it seems to work for them, so I'm going to copy that. In the case with you, assuming you have ASD level 1, that's just a really fucking smart thing to do. That was a very intelligent move on your part. And I would say, don't you ever throw that away. That's a skill that you have cultivated very well, and you want to keep it. All people do that to some degree. So I don't want you to think that, well, because I have to act, that there's something wrong with me or somehow I'm defective or flawed. No. You are an individual who thinks differently. We'll call it autism, but you're living in a neurotypical world. If you only spoke English and you were forced to live in Russia and you didn't know the language, you would pretty quickly figure out a few things to get by so that people didn't get mad at you, so that they didn't get irritated with you when they're trying to talk to you and you don't understand much of what they're saying, and you notice that they get annoyed with you when you don't understand them, and somebody else comes up to talk to you in Russian, and they're trying to get a point across, and you don't understand them, and you notice, okay, when people come up to me and try to connect with me and I act as if I don't understand what they're saying, which I don't, they get upset with me. So I'm going to act as if I understand. I'm going to pretend like I get it. And that's a survival mechanism that you had to have. Thank God you have it. Then the other piece of this equation was, how can I just be true to myself? You know, when do I turn this on? When do I turn it off? There's no shame in having this disorder. It's more widespread than you know. There is more tolerance now than there was even 10 years ago. We know that this doesn't mean that somebody is retarded or stupid or narcissistic or sociopathic. That's outdated, old school myths. That's by the wayside for the vast majority of society today. So there's nothing wrong with divulging, well, I'm just going to use the term blind spot. There's nothing wrong with divulging your blind spots to the people that are important to you. I'm going to make up an example that may or may not apply, but hopefully it will help you understand. You could say to somebody that you trust, being around this large of a crowd with all this noise really stresses me out, and so if I'm acting a little off, just to let you know, really have sensory overload right now.
So one common question that comes up from neurotypical spouses is, why does my autistic spouse prefer tasks over socializing? Well, to answer this question, we first need to look at the concept of weak predictive ability. If one has the ability to predict, he or she can come up with an educated guess about what may happen in the near or distant future. That is, some outcome is expected. But this ability is not necessarily based on experience or knowledge. Prediction is a skill that allows us to generalize. In other words, since the occurrence of situation A resulted in outcome B, then a situation similar to A will likely result in an outcome similar to B. Prediction not only affords quicker and more accurate reaction, but also more efficient neural coding. Now, people on the autism spectrum have poor predictive abilities. In other words, they have great difficulty predicting future events. Another function of prediction is to fill in missing information. For example, if the driver in front of you veers his car sharply to the left and then to the right, you might predict that he swerved in order to avoid hitting something in the road. The autistic person's impaired predictive ability means impaired filling in of missing information for perception and action. So what does weak predictive ability have to do with a preference for tasks versus preferring to be with people and socializing? Well, since people on the autism spectrum have to live every day with the uncertainty inflicted by their poor predictive skills, they tend to favor relatively predictable and precise events and tasks. So as a result, they prefer dealing with facts, figures, objects, and so on, which are more predictable, instead of with people, which are less predictable. And I think you would agree that people are very unpredictable. So research, engineering, computers, other things that involves facts, figures, and objects have a much greater appeal to individuals who don't like a lot of unpredictability in their life. Due to difficulties with generalizing skills, people on the autism spectrum have a lower tolerance for unpredictability and complexity. They argue that figures, facts, objects, and associated tasks are predictable and simple, whereas people are not. Now, this is a message to the neurotypical spouses out there that are trying to make sense of their autistic spouse's need for obsessions and repetitive behaviors. So the reasons that people on the autism spectrum develop obsessions can be varied and many. One of the things that goes on is it helps them cope with the uncertainties of daily life. It can help them to relax. It provides order and predictability because, as you may or may not know, the day-to-day routine for individuals on the autism spectrum is highly unpredictable. So that's why they prefer routines and basically thrive and crave and demand structure. Plus, they get a lot of enjoyment just from taking a deep dive on one special narrow area of interest. And also, if they have difficulty socializing, they will often use their special interest as a topic of discussion so that they can kind of fit in. So repetitive behaviors also serve a function as opposed to a dysfunction. Some people, when they are anxious, will revert to some repetitive behaviors. Sometimes people on the autism spectrum need to increase sensory input, and sometimes they need to reduce sensory input. So an attempt to reduce sensory input could be the result of needing to distract oneself from sensory overload. And one example of needing to gain sensory input could be if the individual is bored or needs some kind of a distraction to reduce anxiety. So there is numerous reasons for obsessions and repetitive behaviors. Just know that routines are very much anxiety reduction strategy for people with ASD. So set routines, times, particular routes and rituals all help the individual to make order out of an otherwise chaotic life. So you, as a neurotypical spouse, need to understand that your autistic spouse will have a strong preference for routines and sameness. He's not going to like change, especially surprise change. He's not going to want his routines to be disrupted. So please don't take that personally, or you can take it personally if you want to, but you're not going to get it changed. So predictability is an anxiety reduction strategy, and obsessions and repetitive behaviors help establish predictability. I got a statement from an NT wife, and she says that my ASD husband can't see the forest for the trees. Well, it is a common trait among autistic individuals that they see parts instead of the whole. And it's a problem in some settings, especially of a social and or emotional nature, but it's a terrific attribute in other areas. For example, it's an attribute if you're looking for deep space anomalies, such as an astronomer, or if you're looking at unique cells, like a lab technician would, or if you're looking for differences among species, as a biological researcher would, or if you're looking for particular qualities of objects, for example, as a gemologist, antiques appraiser, or art historian. So it is hard for them to see the big picture when it comes to social and emotional nuances, but with things of a non-social nature, seeing the trees rather than the forest is actually a bonus. So a quick message to the autistic husbands out there. Your neurotypical wife's feelings are a fact. If she has particular emotion going on inside of her, that emotion is a fact. For example, let's say that she lost her father recently, and she is grief-stricken at the loss of her father. That sense of loss, that feeling of grief is literally measurable if they were to do a brain scan. So that feeling is a fact. If she says, for example, I'm feeling sad that I don't get some of my intimacy needs met, that feeling is a fact. And you might say, well, Mark, she said, I feel that you don't love me. And I do love her. That's not a fact. You're right. Because if she says, I feel that you don't love me, that's not a feeling. That's a thought. So sometimes she will say, well, I feel such and such, and it's technically not a feeling, it's a thought. So her thoughts are not necessarily facts, but her feelings are, and so are yours. So when she's expressing her feelings, don't view it as, oh, she's so emotional, and oh, that can't be true. You don't feel that way. No, I'm sure she's not lying about her feelings. If she says she feels a certain way and she's actually using an emotion rather than a thought, she's not lying. That's what's going on. So when she's talking to you about her feelings, don't chalk it off as just a bunch of psychobabble with no factual basis. If you're feeling a particular way, let's say you're feeling mad at her, and I say, no, you don't feel mad. That's not reality. No, you would say, by God, I am mad, and it is a fact that I'm mad. So you understand now that feelings are facts. So when you enter a neurodiverse relationship and then on to the neurodiverse marriage, it's a lot like a boxing match and getting in the boxing ring. Some people play by a different set of rules. They may butt heads, they may knee you in the groin, they may step on your foot. So some people are going to abide by the standard boxing rules and some are not. They might hit below the belt, they might push you into the ropes, all kinds of things. And you have to know that this is just human nature. It's not just the experience that you're having in a neurodiverse marriage. If you think broadly, you run into people who don't play by the rules in general. If you're walking down the street and you trip over a rock, you don't get angry at the rock. So people are a lot like rocks that get in your way. They are, in a sense, obstacles from time to time for you. They have their own nature, and that nature isn't yours, and it's going to clash with you sometimes, and that's just what it means to be a human in general, but you may experience this to a larger degree in the neurodiverse marriage. So are you going to complain that people have a nature where they have an ego, or they can be passive-aggressive, or they cannot play by the rules, or they have weak moments and, quote, misbehave, unquote? And then in your constant complaining, you put yourself in a chronic disadvantage because you're draining yourself of a lot of energy that could be better used for other things. You're draining yourself with all these useless negative emotions, and you're not playing proper defense against your opponent, if we want to run with this boxing analogy, because you're all consumed with this kind of personalizing the situation, that this person shouldn't be doing these things, they shouldn't be hitting me, they shouldn't be getting in my way, they shouldn't be trying to defend themselves, they shouldn't be engaged in self-preservation, they shouldn't have their own fears and worries and anxieties. So instead, you have to create some distance between you and your opponent. And you have to do that in a very smart and intelligent way. That's called healthy emotional detachment. Not just your neurodiverse marriage, but other people in general. They're going to play a little dirty from time to time, and they're going to hit you, and it's going to hurt. But you don't whine and complain. You just figure out how you're going to defend yourself better. And one of the ways you defend yourself is not necessarily to hit back, but not make yourself vulnerable by putting yourself in harm's way time and time again, or having very mature and convincing arguments that influence the other person to perhaps change their behavior.